just write your name or number. So the next time I come to okay, I will be teaching you the history of Indian Buddhist Dharma. Okay, normally now the latest trend is, as we are in the process of decolonizing, and so generally we don't use the word Buddhism now. Instead of Buddhism, we use the word Buddha Dharma. You can use Buddhism if you like, but mostly now we use the expression Buddhism. Okay? When you read, say for example, the Pali text material, the Pali scripture or the commentary in the word used for the teachings of the Buddha or the Buddha is called Dhamma. Dhamma. Okay. So the Pali word is Dhamma and the Sanskrit word is Dhamma. In the Sanskrit sutras of Buddhism, the word used is Dhamma. Okay. So this word Buddhism or Hinduism generally is okay. But if you feel you are happy with Buddhism, you can do that. There is really no rule to stop you from using that expression. Okay? But most people prefer now Buddhism or Buddhism. Those of you who say others, you will use the word Dhamma. Okay? Or Buddhism. Okay? Right. Today we shall talk about the origins of the Buddha or Buddhism. Now, this is the state where Nalanda is located, Bihar. And the neighboring province on the western side is called Uttar Pradesh. Okay. These two provinces primarily were the area where the Buddha lived and preached. This area is called Madhya Pradesh in Pali and Madhya Pradesh in Sanskrit. Madhya Pradesh, central kingdom you could call the central region. So the Buddha basically preached in this area. And maybe the neighboring state on the western side of Uttar Pradesh, Haryana. Okay, Mahasati Katha, very famous sutta of the Buddha was preached by the Buddha very close to a place called Sonika, some 30-40 kilometers from the border of Delhi state. So till about here. And maybe some parts of the neighboring area and some parts of today Nepal. The Buddha himself apparently was born in a place called Lumbini, a spot called Lumbini, which is about 2 kilometers from the border, India. Okay? But there is all kinds of controversy whether the Buddha was really born in Lumbini or not. We will talk about that. For example, Buddha was born exactly after 10 months. Okay? 10 lunar months. Now, normally children are born after 9 months. So, because he was a great being, he was born after 10 months. And now the tradition in India generally is that the eldest child is born in the mother's parent house. Okay. So, when the lady is to give birth to the first child, the lady goes back to her parent house. Now this is very astonishing that the lady she waited for 10 months to go to her parents' house. It was such a heavy risk that the child was born on the way in the forest. give birth to a child. Possibly she would have moved much earlier to her parents. Why did she wait till the last day? That to 10 months. Okay. So historians have all kinds of questions which are not so easy to answer. But here, we generally say that it is impossible to write the biography, historical biography of the Buddha. Impossible. You cannot. Because he is our hero, and we attribute all kinds of things to our hero, because he is perfect in everything. So therefore, the Buddha, who was possibly a human being like you and me, slowly has been turned into some kind of God. Okay, so all kinds of things have been attributed to the Buddha. And for example, that the Buddha's father was a king, right? When you read very carefully the portions of the Pali Tipitaka where this information is given about the father of the Buddha, it is not really mentioned that his father was a king. His father was perhaps the chief of a small community called Shah, tribal community. Tribal people, first of all, do not really have a state or a kingdom in a sense, as we have kings like Ajatashatru, or Bimbisara, or Pasena. It is a tribal community, small number, perhaps only maybe 4,000 or 5,000. Very small number. And we know, when we look at the political history of India, of that period, we do not have any kings in India. And we also have information in the Pali text itself, at least at two places, where the Buddha calls himself Kosala, from Kosala. Kosala is a proper kingdom ruled by a king called Pasena. Historians say that the Shakyas were actually a small community which formed part of the Persian kingdom, whose king was Pasena. So what was Buddha's father? Shuddha. And again, very interesting, the Buddha's father's name was Shuddha, pure cooked rice. Okay. And all his brothers have rice names. Odhan. All his brothers, Buddha's father's brother. Okay. Perhaps it was a rice growing field. Also very interestingly, this area grew a kind of rice which is very, very famous, very kind of expensive, special kind of rice. And in fact, lately the Indians were a few years ago trying to get some kind of UNESCO status or something that this rice would be sort of popularized as a sort of relic or association to the Buddha, very nice, and perhaps it would be good for tourism and business and the dissemination of the Buddha. Okay, so a lot of interesting things. So historians generally agree that the Buddha's father was an elected chief. Elected chief. Okay. And it is mentioned in the Bible. Elected chief. Some people call it Shaka, state, right? But it was a small. I'm using Sanskrit words. If you want to use Pali words, you're most welcome. So, Sakya or Sakya is in Pali. Sakya, Shakya. He was elected. So what does it mean? It means there is very little chance of the Buddha also getting elected if he decided not to leave them. If his father was an elected chief, the chances Buddha would also have. Because a member of parliament's son has better chance of becoming a member of parliament. But not always. Not always. It is not hereditary. Okay? Our books at some places tend to show as if the Buddha's father was a king and it was hereditary. Primogeniture, the eldest male child. But anyway, Buddha was the only child of his parents. Also remember this, very interesting. In Buddhism, we are told that the lady who gives birth to our hero, no other child can be born from her. The womb that gives birth to our hero, that womb will not give birth to any other child. And that lady must die within 1 week. Why within 1 week? Because if she doesn't die, and then there is a possibility of all kinds of bad things happening in terms of her character. So that Buddha's mother is as pure as the Buddha himself. She must die within. But then is the Buddha responsible for her death? Lot of explanations have been given. The Buddha cannot be responsible for anything that. He is our hero, 100% pure. So therefore, all Buddhas, future Buddhas and past Buddhas, all Buddhas, their mothers died within them. And even after giving birth to the Buddha, the lady is a virgin. Why a virgin? Why Jesus' mother is virgin? Virgin means pure. If the Buddha's mother doesn't remain virgin after his birth, it will be very bad for Buddha's reputation. He spoiled her virginity. So, when we talk about the biography of the Buddha, which is impossible to write, we will talk about this. For example, when she conceives the Buddha, Buddha's father is never there. She never slept in the same room. Sorry?
There was an elephant, right?
Yes. So, we are told that Buddha's mother never ever went near her husband. Why? Because sexual intercourse is a very dirty and ugly thing. Lust. Because when man and woman make love to produce a child, they have to have some sort of lust. Lust is something very ugly and dirty and bad. So, our hero's mother conceived him without any sexual union. So as our friend was saying, she conceives her child in a dream, and it is not through the birth canal. Birth canal area is never used. The white elephant enters her body through her rib and she becomes pregnant. Okay? So, a lot of very questions. Anyway, so Buddhism originates in this area, and the Buddha spends all his 45 years of wisdom in this area. Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, and some of the neighboring regions of this area, including parts of Nepal. But we have all kinds of legends that the Buddha went to Sri Lanka, Buddha went to Vietnam, Buddha went to Tibet, China, Mongolia. I remember I went to the holy shrine of the Buddhists and Hindus called Kailash in Tibet. And when I was doing the circumambulation of the Buddha, there are so many places where you have Buddha's footprint. Buddha landed here. Okay, and that's why I'm saying that impossible to write the historical biography. He's a hero and it is religion. Okay, so all kinds of information, and some scholars have tried to write the biography of the Buddha by leaving out legends, and then they have given up. Because legends have their own value. Why white elephants enters our body in our dream? What is the meaning of white elephant? White elephant has 2 tusks, then maybe 6 tusks. Why? So all that stuff with religious significance. Okay, historically speaking, it doesn't make much sense. Okay, so how does Buddhism come into picture? Historians believe that it was iron that was responsible for the birth of Buddha. Very funny, right? Historians say that if iron technology had not come into use in the 6th century BCE, there would be no Buddha. Why? Historians say that the Buddha could have been born only in the 6th century, not before. Why? Because, let us say, can you run a computer without a battery, electricity? You can't, right? So computer can only come into existence if you have electricity. Right? So historians say that towards the beginning of 6th century BC or so, iron technology came into use in India. And this revolutionized agriculture, resulting in surplus production of food. And then historians say surplus production gave birth to urban centers, cities. Now look at this. Cities cannot come into origin unless village people, rural people produce surplus food. Cities don't produce their own food. Right? Cities get their food from villagers, farmers. If farmers have only food enough for themselves, then cities cannot survive. So cities can come into origin according to this hypothesis only when you have sufficient food produced by the rural communities who can spare some of this food for those people who do not have to work as farmers, like city people. City people do not produce their own food. So, to urban centers, for urban centers to come into origin, sorry, it's new computer, shut down. to have revolution in agriculture. This revolution in agriculture was brought by iron technology. This is one major hypothesis. And so when urbanization comes into origin, Buddhism comes in. So the birth of Buddha Dharma basically happens because we have now cities, urban culture. Prior to the 6th century BCE, we had only rural settlements. There was no city. So the Vedic Dharma is primarily the rural Dharma. It is only by about 6th century BCE that Indians began settling in middle Ganga Valley, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. It was here that for the first time in historic India, Indians have started settling down. Apparently forests are cleared through the use of iron technology, and then we have urban centers. And if you look at the Pali Tibetan points, you will be surprised. Nearly every important Buddhist monk and nun comes from a city. There is hardly any monk or nun from a village. As part of my PhD, I did some statistical study of the Pali Vinayaka and Sutrika. I collected the names of all the men and women, monks and nuns and others, who are mentioned in the Pali Vinayaka. About 2,200 people. And then their background and caste. Background, whether they are from rural areas or urban areas, and their caste. You will be surprised that more than 90% come from only 6 major cities, like Varanasi, or this place, Rajgir, Rajgarh, or Champa, or Koshambi, Vaishali, 6 cities. 90%. And more than 44-45% of them were Brahmins. Others Kshatriyas. Shudras. So interestingly, earliest Buddha Dharma is completely urban. And monks and nuns came from Brahman and Kshatriya, upper caste. When we say the Buddha opposed caste system, not exactly true. There is a catch. Buddha does not say, I don't believe in caste system. Buddha only says, I believe that caste must be determined by a person's karma, not the birth of a person. Okay? Na jaccha vasmo hoti, na jaccha hoti brahmano, kammuna vasmo hoti, kammuna hoti. A person doesn't become a Brahman or a low caste person by birth. Person becomes a Brahman or a low caste person by karma. That means if I am a Shudra by birth and I do good karma, I have the right to call myself a Brahman. So Buddha did not say there should be no Brahmans, no Shudras. He says, no. Brahmans and Shudras have to be there. Only the karma should decide whether a person deserves to become a Brahman or a Shudra. So the Buddha had a debate with one Brahman, and Buddha tells this Brahman that you are a Shudra and I am a Brahman. Right? So very interesting. Now, we may not necessarily agree with this, we will come to that later, but quite a few scholars have suggested that in the Madhya days or Madhya Desh, this area where the Buddha preached for 45 years, iron tools like sickle, axe, plough. We see important tools, agricultural tools, came into use around the 6th century BC. And the use of these tools resulted in a sort of revolution in agriculture. And revolution, as I said, leads to surplus, and this gives birth to urbanization, cities, which are called nagaras. Okay, city. There are various kinds of expressions used. Generic term is nagara, and also terms like Pura or a few other terms. Mahanagara is one, the big city, cosmopolitan city, and so on. And so historians tell us that if there were no urban centers in India, Buddha would not have become a famous historical person. Or let us say Buddha Dharma would not have come into origin. That is, I may be good enough to produce a computer, but because batteries and electricity do not exist, so my idea of producing a computer would be worthless. So I have the idea and the module design, but I can't produce a computer because I need electricity which doesn't exist. So historians say that Buddha Dharma was a dharma of city. When cities come into origin, the material village, social, economic, religious and political condition of cities was totally different from the rural civilization that existed prior to the. So how cities are different? In the villages, I remember as a child, it is impossible to talk to a girl. Everybody knows it. So it is easy to follow the rules of caste system in the village. I remember as a little boy in the village, very strict caste rule. Whenever I try to play with one of the boys in our neighborhood, separate quarter in the village because people live in different parts of the village on the basis of the caste. So scheduled caste people have different quarter in the village. And in those days there was a fair amount of untouchability, all kinds of things. And so if I ever happened to play with one of those children who were from the Shudra background, or Chandala background, my grandmother, she was a very religious lady from Haryana, a very conservative state. She would get very angry and she would give me a holy water of Ganga, sprinkle over me and do it to me. And I would get very angry, really very angry. And because the population is small, everybody knows everything. But in a city, impossible to do that. Right? You can hide in the crowds. And then these people do various kinds of businesses. Let's say restaurants, eating shops, or inns like hotels. So if I am a Shudra, I'm running a tea shop in the corner of a city, I don't think anybody would bother to find out my caste. It wouldn't really work. But I could tell a lie and say I'm not coming. And it would be impossible to verify. So caste system simply wouldn't work in this. I remember when I was doing my PhD, I came to Bihar to do field. I was walking through the countryside. And so there was a hand pump. I was very interested in the people. One Bihari came, "Kaun jati?" I said, "Brahman." And he told Shudra. And in villages, caste system can be followed. And long distance travel in the countryside wasn't allowed. The so-called Brahmanical dharma, before Buddha dharma comes into origin, you do not have long distance travel. Long distance travel is not really like in Brahman dharma, at least of this period, we are talking about. And so in the cities, you have people who travel long distances, traders. And traders are at position 3 in the hierarchy, below the Brahmins and Vaishyas. So the Vaishyas, the third caste, is almost next to the Shudras. And they do not necessarily get much respect in the Brahmanical places. So it was these businessmen, traders like Anath who became the biggest supporters of Buddha. Buddha Dharma did not have any supporters in the countryside, only in the cities. So scholars have said that Buddha Dharma comes into origin or the Buddha's ideas become popular, and this dharma becomes a major dharma in India because it catered to the needs of city. So in other words, Buddha dharma has become only successful because cities had come into origin, and this dharma catered to the needs of city. Okay? So, now the question is, what exactly was the role of this higher technology, as I said, in the birth of Buddha Dharma? So these important questions. Was iron technology responsible for the birth of Buddha Dharma, origin of Buddha Dharma? Or was Buddha Dharma primarily an urban and elite? Nowadays, in certain quarters, we are told that the Buddha was a social revolutionary. He opposed caste system. He spoke for the Shudras, and he was a champion of the cause of the Shudras, as Dr. Ambedkar pointed out. We will try to look at this. Was it really like this? Was the Buddha really a social revolutionary, or was the Buddha a person who had left home, who was a homeless teacher, who would teach anybody, a Brahman or a Shudra or a Chandra? He did not pay any attention to caste. Or does he wage a sort of war against caste system, India's caste system? Does he do that? And if he does that, what is the result? Interestingly, when we do caste system, we will see that actually caste system becomes much worse after the Buddha than it was before the Buddha. So Buddha doesn't really wage a war against caste. Buddha is not bothered about caste. Let's say most of us, we are not bothered about caste. At least I am not. I don't make friendships with the basis of a person's caste. It makes no difference to me. It could be a Shudra or a Chandala or a Brahman, I don't care. And so Buddha was a teacher. He simply did not care. He doesn't exactly wage a war against caste system. He was not a leader, a spiritual leader, or a social leader. He was a dharma teacher. So he and his colleagues have established the Sangha and Viharas, and everybody is welcome. So this was the difference. Possibly in Brahma Dharma, a Shudra or a Chandala, a person untouchable. Chandala, untouchable. Because these people who have serious problems, Shudras were not exactly in as bad a condition as the Chandala. So Buddha is not bothered as to whether you are a Chandala or a Shudra or a Brahmin. He kept the doors of his viharas open to everyone, with very few restrictions, like if you are a slave or you have to go in jail or you are in government service, then you cannot enter the vihara. Or in some why? Because the king gave a warning to you that my soldiers, instead of doing their duties as soldiers, run away and become bhikkhu. But big problem, because adopting no soldiers. Somebody borrowed money from somebody, a lot of money, and then became a bhikkhu. Even today, very normal. And so these businessmen who did businesses like money lending, they came to Buddha. Somebody who owes money. Otherwise, as far as caste is concerned, Buddha is not giving. But the problem is, let us say I am a Shudra and you are the Sangha. I come here and I tell the Buddha, Bhante, I want to become a bhikkhu. Buddha says, okay. I sit here. Now, I have no education. Or let us say I am teaching in this class in English medium. We ask one of the security guards to come and sit with you. I mean, what will happen? He cannot even speak Hindi properly. He does not understand a single word of English. What will happen to him if he is made to sit with you? He will be fed up. Perhaps who will make his life miserable? Because he is not your person. Despite all your education, you won't like to be friends with him. He is good for nothing. Maybe he smells, poor fellow, he doesn't take shower every day due to his poverty. Maybe he doesn't have access to enough water. And maybe his habits are different. Maybe he does this or whatever. And maybe he doesn't dress up like you. And so you will literally quiet out despite all of it. Trust me. This has been tried out in modern classes. I taught at Delhi University for about 40 years and tried this. Humans are very cruel and very dangerous and very bad. Humans are actually a shameful creation of God. They are very, very bad. Educated boys and girls. I've seen Shudras being treated very badly in the same class. So, Buddha opened the doors of his viharas for everything. Shudras don't come. Because Brahmins and Kshatriyas Bhante of the Brahman and Kshatriya background don't like that. Hey, clean guy. Bhante, we have proper document handbook. A monk of Brahman background still behaves like a Brahman in the Sangha. And a Shudra, a monk of Shudra background is treated as a Shudra in Sangha. So when it comes to preaching, all bhikkhus and bhikkhunis were teachers. You can become teachers in universities, right? That God, if He is made to sit with you for 2 years, I don't think you'll get master's degree. Can never become a teacher. So you know that. So you treat him as garbage. So we have enough evidence that in Bihar, all the monks and nuns of Shudra background, some of them women of Shudra, largely were treated very, very badly. Okay. So, we will do more on this. Buddha Dharma is purely an urban dharma. All the monks and other highly educated persons, primarily of Brahman and Kshatriya, well educated. If a person who is not well educated joins the Sangha, Buddha says, okay, no problem. This person cannot become a Dharma teacher. He has no education. And remember this, when somebody says, oh, Buddha Dharma, very easy, very easy. Nonsense. Buddha Dharma, to understand, is not very easy. It's a stupid thing to say Buddha Dharma, very easy. I don't think most of you would remember the 12 organs of Paticsamuppada and the connection. Yeah, but no. I have tried in the class, but here because most of them are monks and unfortunately they know. But in general, I have personal experience of finding out from teachers who teach Buddhism, Buddha, even they don't remember what they were. Okay? And to understand Anatta, Anatman, no soul, or Paticca, or even Shunya, Nirvana, very complex. Very difficult. You have to have certain level of education to understand. Buddha Dharma is not eat meat or don't eat meat, don't hate food, that kind of stuff. It's not that. Buddha Dharma also the philosophy of the Dharma, of the Dhamma, is very technical. You need very good training and education to understand. And so therefore, an uneducated Shudra who joins the Sangha is incapable of becoming a Dharma teacher. So his colleagues, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis of upper caste background who have good education, will treat him like garbage. To say, do the cleaning. So the duties a Shudra was doing outside the Sangha is also doing inside the Sangha. So the leading teachers who can respect are of Brahman. Very few exceptions. Upali is perhaps the only wonderful exception in the Dharma, a person of Shudra background who becomes Vinay Balok, higher authority only in that. Upali was a Shudra. Only in name. Upali was a barber in the household of Buddha's father. And a barber or a cook has access So when Siddhartha Gautama was taught by teachers in his father's barber, this barber boy also was watching the lamp. So being a barber in the house of a chief was perhaps as privileged as any Brahman, maybe more. So by watching the Buddha, Devadatta and other boys in the family, Upali also educates himself. So there are some exceptions. In general, otherwise, though the Buddha kept the doors of his viharas and the Sangha open to everyone, but only a small number of Shudras and Chandalas become meaningful members of the Sangha and teachers. Otherwise, the Sangha is completely dominated by Brahmanas. Remember. So to say that the Buddha opposed Brahmins, not true. Not true. This is modern time political propaganda in India and elsewhere. That the Buddha opposed Brahmins. He did not. Buddha only criticized bad Brahmins who did not follow the Brahman Dharma or the Dharma. Otherwise, you would have chapters and vakkas in the Pali literature. Dhampak, for example, has one full vakka, one chapter called Brahman, where Buddha says, Brahman is so good, Brahman is like this, Brahman is like this, Brahman is like that. Very good. Okay, and the Buddha calls himself a Brahman. Okay? So, early Dharma is completely elite and upper class. At the time of the Buddha, we had the Pali Tipitaka itself mentions a couple of places, including the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, that there were as many as 62 religious leaders, and 3 or 4 of them became very popular. The other equally popular leader was Mahavir, the founder of Jainism. Then there were Charakas and Ajivikas and others. Okay? A total as many as 62. Hello? Hello? How do you have to do? Communicate with them. क्या उठा रहे? अच्छा ग्रहण को दे दीजिए और इसके मिश्रण क्यों उठा रहे क्या? अच्छा दीजिए इसको व्यक्ति को. हेलो. हाँ भाई इनको बिहार कीजिए, मेरे कंप्यूटर है मेरे पास रिपेयर करने के लिए. मैं प्रोफेसर सराव बोल रहा हूँ, क्लास है क्लास. ठीक है. हाँ. So, you have large number of these leaders who have been preaching in the middle Ganga Valley, as many as 62, maybe more, and 3 or 4 of them become very successful. And we see that all of them basically have catered to the new urban life that has come into existence, urban material millions. Urban material. Okay, so now more or less this is settled that Buddhism is basically an urban religion. Dharma, the Sangha consists of largely of monks and nuns who come from upper caste background. We will talk more about it, but before that, the revolution. Was the revolution, agricultural revolution brought in by Koshambi. In 1950s, very famous person. His father worked at Harvard, and he was also a scholar of Pali, and Koshambi himself was a great scholar from Goa. And he is the first person who came up with this idea that iron technology revolutionized agriculture in the 6th century BC. So Koshambi was the first person to talk about this, and some scholars have suggested that he read somewhere in Greek history the role of iron technology, and he came up with this idea and he applied it in the Indian context in the 6th century BC. This idea became very popular, and then another very famous professor, R.S. Sharma, he was one of my teachers at Delhi University, a very famous person, again a leftist historian. He also further did research and wrote quite a few research papers saying that it was iron technology that was responsible for the birth of Buddha Dharma itself. So in this hypothesis, they say that iron implements, as I mentioned before you, sickle and plow, and then they access, and with these they cleared the thick vegetation of the population. So Professor Koshambi and Professor Sharma proposed that you had thick vegetation in the middle Ganga Valley. Organic Valley, Ganga Valley. Thick vegetation. There was no place to do agriculturing, so these big trees were cut and space was created for farming. So Sharma and Koshambi say that iron axe was used. Bronze technology before that could not have made this possible. It was only iron axe that was used to cut these big trees with big stumps, and then iron plow. Before that, wooden plow was used. Iron plow was used to plow the land, and sickle was used to cut the crops, and such implements came into use in the 6th century BC as an revolutionized agriculture. And so, as I told you, this led to the birth of Buddha, successor. And by the way, people write Buddha, it is not Buddha, it is the Buddha. Okay? It is a title. Buddha did this, Buddha did this. Please don't say that. It's incorrect English. The Buddha, all the Buddha. Okay. Now, when Professor Sharma particularly wrote quite a few research papers, some scholars expressed some doubt. One doubt was the evidence of only small number of agricultural tools in the excavation. In the excavation, you don't have a evidence. So how can you say iron technology was used when tools have not been found in this? Just imagine in the whole of Bihar, only one or two iron axes have been found. You can't initiate a revolution with two new axes. So scholars express that doubt, but Sharma ji came up with this answer that acidic, highly humid, look at the humidity here, very warm alluvial soil of eastern UP and Bihar is highly corrosive. So Professor Sharma said, the soil is such. We are lucky that we have found maybe two or three. Because these tools were destroyed, and we are talking about 2,500 years ago. Long time. So Professor Sharma says, In the excavation, it's naturally you will not find too many of these tools because the soil is acidic, alluvial, humid, and so these tools of normal iron, they were not steel, they get rusted. So the tools got rusted and they became dust through oxidation. Then he also said the excavations have been very defective. And of course, he and others pointed out that the excavations have been done in cities. Agriculture happens in the villages, countryside. So cities are the wrong place to look for agricultural tools. Okay, so this is the other reason he gives. And then he says the evidence would be that iron technology was used around that time. Punch mark coin, cutting of the coin and punching them needed fairly developed technology. Also, large-scale wooden structures mentioned by Mexians who came in the 3rd, 4th century BCE, 4th century BCE, who wrote that famous book Indica. So Mexians mentions about wooden fortification around Patliputra, Patna city, and so Professor Sharma and others say that the building of such a fortification, wooden fortification, would require highly developed iron technology. Highly developed iron technology, and so therefore to say that you have not found very many tools in the excavations which are urban cities, excavations done in urban areas, is not exactly correct. So he says there were tools, and so this is the evidence he gives, and the other explanation is why we have not been able to find too many tools. Okay. Alright. One or two other little things I would like to mention. Oh, sorry, time. We don't use AD and BC these days. We use CE and BC. This is kind of more Christian sort of term, then normally and before Christ. So we use common era and before common era. And normally we use C, for example, when our Census Maurya's date of section, we say C 321. C is basically circa approximate. Okay. So we continue from here. Tomorrow, can you meet tomorrow? One class? When are you free?
Three to four is
3 to 4 is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, anytime.